Welcome. For those who haven't met before or haven't met me before, I'm Sean Slade. I'm one of the two co-heads of BTS Spark North America, and BTS Spark is a educational leadership organization, and we seek to try and improve the leadership skills of leaders into the future, in uncertainty, and with a strong desire to help develop the whole educator as well. As you know, you probably don't need too much upskilling on Zoom, but one thing we are able to do when you're on Zoom as a participant is actually change the levels of your screen. So if you would rather not see too much of the PowerPoint slides and the questions and the quotes, and you'd rather see the panelists, then by all means, there is a tab where you can do that as well. I think by now we're all pretty much experts at Zoom or Teams or WebEx or FaceTime. So you could probably teach me a thing or two. We also have, we'll have a Q&A at the very end. You can post your questions whenever. And there's also the chat box, which will be going consistently as well. So if you have questions or if you have things to share, then by all means, let us and everybody else know. So as we do this, we spend a couple of minutes just leading through why we're talking about this topic and why we're talking about this theme. So this theme is leading change from a common vision to aligned actions. And I don't think that anybody needs also to be reminded that we are actually living through a period of quite dramatic change. And I've said this before, but I don't actually think we're going to understand or realize how much change we're actually going through, not only as a society, but also as a sector, probably for another couple of years. I think we're going to look back at these years and think, well, that really was a quite monumental watershed. But the thing that's really key about alignment is making sure that we're getting people who are heading in the same direction, who are heading towards the same goals, who have that North Star. And, you know, we might talk about alignment in terms of sporting teams or groups, but what we want to discuss today is really what alignment means in terms of education. So what kind of things do we need to bring together? What kind of conversations do we need to have? And one thing that's really key for us at BTS Spark is really making sure that people or communities or schools that are going through these processes of change are actually heading in the right direction. And we've spent enough time to get that buy-in to make sure that we have a common vision, and not just a vision where the leader or one person has said, this is the direction, but a common vision that has been actually developed and evolved with key stakeholders. Because as we've said, and we have the little analogy there of rowing, you know, you need people heading in the same direction. And I think that's probably a little bit more needed and obvious in this time than it probably has at any other time. And there are certain things as well that we need to make sure that we're aligning, because there are standard functions of a school, you know, definitely assessment, definitely curriculum instruction, but also the professional learning that goes on. Sometimes we assume that we can put down a manifesto or we can change a policy and things will change. But the ongoing professional learning in not only what that change is, but also establishing the climate and the culture for change is really key. You know, we are talking about some of those systems inside the school, the assessment, the instruction, the curriculum, and making sure that they're working together. But we're also talking about initiatives where you might need to align things around the whole school and the whole community. And that can be things ranging from supports to health services to community agencies. So how do we start to bring these things together as well? Because that's also a change initiative. And I've got a quote from Adam Koulis and his work at the Tacoma Whole Child Initiative. Tacoma's been doing some wonderful things around whole child over the last probably 3 or 4 years now at least. But we also have Greg Benner on, who is leading some of that work up in Tacoma. And speaking of Greg, we also found a nice quote from one of his publications. These initiatives, they can look like fashion trends sometimes, where we're doing something over here and we're doing something over there, but we don't always understand how they interact and how they relate. And so something which spans the whole school or the whole community, or a vision which is looking towards change and involvement, you can start to bring these various elements in together, but as long as you have that common story. And as myself and Laura Slover from Centrepoint Education, we put out this article a couple of weeks ago, stated, as I mentioned at the start, we're in the midst of some really major change, not only as a society, but as a sector. And so really understanding how we embark on this change and how we garner support and how we can come out of it successfully, I think is really key at the moment. So that brings us on to the welcomes, and I'm going to introduce each of our esteemed panelists now. And then as I introduce them, they can also turn on their video camera as well, so we can see them. And then we're going to launch into some conversations about leading change and get to hear from their expertise. So Laura Slover is the president and CEO of Centrepoint Education Solutions, a mission-driven nonprofit, and works to build strong schools, aligned academic programs, and to advance student achievement. And she's had a background with Achieve and also a background with Park and working with the Common Core state standards. So I think she's going to provide a lot of expertise around this discussion. So I was going to say good morning, Laura, but really it's for you and me, it's good afternoon since we're over on the East Coast.
Lunchtime, yes.
Yeah, lunchtime, exactly. Now, it will be morning for Greg, who's over in Alabama. Dr. Greg Benner is the Helen and Pat O'Sullivan Professor in the College of Education at the University of Alabama. Commiserations on not getting your college football title this year, Greg, but I'm sure you can wait another 12 months for that if need be. But as I mentioned, Greg was doing some great work up in Tacoma, Washington around whole child, and he's continued to do that work across Alabama as well. So it's going to be great to hear from Greg. So good morning to you, Greg.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be here with y'all, and excited for the conversation.
Yeah, should be fun. And last but not least, we have Shah Shirok. And if I mispronounce your last name, Shah, you can tell me off and you can correct me. But Shah is the interim superintendent and director of academics at Bay City Schools over in Ohio, with over 30 years of experience, not only in Ohio, but also on some national boards, and work with Ohio around their recent strategic development and strategic initiatives as well. And as you can see from the rest of her bio, she's been awarded and raised up as definitely a leader around professional development standards and assessment. So I imagine it's good morning for you, Shah, in Ohio, correct?
It is good morning for me, absolutely. Ohio is still in the Eastern time zone, and it is snowy maybe soon, and we're right here on the shore of Lake Erie, and I'm so looking forward to the conversation with my colleague, Laura. It's so nice to be connected to her again and to be hearing from Greg and his perspective. So thanks for the invitation, Sean.
You're more than welcome. Thanks for joining us. So we're going to jump into this, and what we typically do is we allow everybody a moment to speak, and then we're going to launch into some more general topics, and we can have a general conversation. So we've got this 1 minute just to hear from each of the panelists about what this phrase means to you, leading change from a common vision to aligned actions. And I'm going to give the floor first of all to Laura.
Thank you, Sean. It's so nice to be here. I'm really pleased to be here with Shar in particular. We've had a long relationship over the years, and great to have Greg part of this conversation, new colleague. When I think about leading change, I think about, I think about the phrase, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think that's particularly important right now in the midst of what I would, call educational chaos, that rather than just do a bunch of stuff out of worry, fear, anxiety, or just urgency, because we all do feel a sense of urgency, it's really important to go back, take a breath, and plan, and be very intentional about strategy and execution. That certainly doesn't sound very sexy, I know, but I think it's important to really go back to the fundamentals. What standards are we trying to teach? What curriculum are we using? Do all of our teachers really have a depth of knowledge around that curriculum? How are we using assessments to measure progress against those expectations? And then what do we do with those data? And to have that be an ongoing cycle, so that teachers have the information they need, the system is fair to students, and everyone's rowing in the same direction. I love that analogy as a college rower. We really do have to row in the same direction to get where you want to be, and also to do that most efficiently. So I'm excited about the opportunity right now. We've had 2 years of struggle, and now we have an opportunity to lead.
Yeah, wonderful. And, it may not sound sexy, but you know what? Not being successful definitely does not sound sexy. So let's make sure that we strive for success, and we strive for actually achieving what we want to do, because we're using so much additional energy and have so many additional stresses that if we are going to embark on change in this period, we definitely want to start to see results. Okay, Greg, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So when I think of this phrase, I think of, I don't know if you are familiar with Simon Sinek. Many of us who are students of leadership have studied his work in the golden circle. But I think of the why, the how, and the what. And oftentimes we are fixated in schools on the what, on strategies, on quick fixes, on the shiny new intervention, or the shiny new curriculum. And now we've gotten COVID money and funds available to us. We've got our hands on it. We want to go spend that money on new programs, and that can be overload our systems. And so when I think of leading change, I think of the why, the how, and the what of making change happen. And change happens from the inside out, not top down. And that's never worked. And we leaders learn that the hard way. And it seems like we have to relearn it every year. But it's changing our hearts first, then our minds, and our actions. And I think that's part of this. But we're in a time, as you mentioned, Sean, like none other. And this is a time where we can really, truly come together and gravitate toward a clear why. And we have more, unprecedented levels of mental health concerns, trauma, employee, stress, exhaustion, burnout, and so on. Can we come together now that we have a clear why for the work we do? Can we now create blueprints and clear actions for implementation to carry out whole community, whole school, whole child transformation, which we need to do? And I think another thing that I think of when I think of this is schools can't do it alone. And I know Jamie Vollmer wrote a great book about that, but that's the truth. And we need after school, we need summer learning, we need early childhood, we need child welfare, we need juvenile justice, we need to be linking arms with our families and go in together, link it with arms linked. Now that we have a shared why, now let's move forward with a shared how, and then shared what's, which are high leverage practices will yield the results that we're looking for. And whole children raise the village. They truly do. And that's our intention. That's the North Star, is to create healthy, safe, challenged, supported, and engaged youth. And we elevate our youth. That's our North Star. But now we can come together to make that dream happen. So that's what I think of, Sean.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think one thing that's really come clear in the last couple of years is we are all in this together. And so whilst that can sound intimidating, trying to do some change during this current period. It also means I think people have had enough time for reflection, and they've had enough time to take a step back and understand, what are we trying to do? Why am I in this career? Or what are we as an education system really trying to achieve? And so I think whilst these periods in history are difficult, they also do provide opportunities where maybe people are more bought in to actually make some concrete and successful change. And let me turn it over to you, Shah, as well, to get your take on this phrase.
Thanks, Sean. Now, when I look at this phrase, I think of a couple of things that have helped me in my leadership over the past 2 years through this pandemic. My background is as a science educator, and we all know that change happens during times when there is a disconnection or a disruption or a rearranging going on of structures. And that's very off-putting and challenging for people. It raises anxiety, and you lose sight of your common ground that you're trying to anchor yourself to. On the plus side of that, when those shifts are happening, is the time to push a little change. And I'm emphasizing the little, right? To push little changes in before all the pieces settle back down the way they have been in the past. And so a couple of things have helped me with that moving forward. I think first, the word common jumps out at me from this quote. That need to find common ground when you have stakeholders who don't have a lot of consistency in their lives. Workplaces change, job expectations change, economic situations change. Just the format of education had to change dramatically, and that was a lot of change. So I think the first thing as a leader is helping them find that common ground again. Oftentimes for educators, the common ground is meeting the needs of our kids. And kind of to Laura's point, bringing it all back to what's best for our children right now and what resources can we have and think about differently to keep the focus on what's best for our children is a great starting point. Yeah. We've done a lot of work with John Hattie and effect size. And when we're thinking about our professional learning and how we're utilizing our time together, our common time, we are thinking about teacher efficacy and what builds teacher efficacy, and what can we do to continue to build the students' abilities to set their own goals and work through those goals, and what role do teachers and support staff and our community partners play in helping students achieve their goals. That can be overwhelming, and I'll share a quote that I have in my office. It's a Chinese proverb that says, the man who moved a mountain starts with a single stone, and I actually have a pile of stones in front of that quote, and I write on those stones what it is that we've accomplished as a reminder that as we're making these changes, we're doing good things. And I think it helps for people when you're sharing the vision, when you're sharing the common ground, to say, look, we're not moving this whole mountain at the same time. What is your one stone? What is that small action that you can take? Let's make that action and reflect on the impact that it had. And then we'll go back and we'll pick up another stone and celebrate the fact that we moved one. And I think that's what I think of as I see this quote.
Yeah, wonderful. I love that little analogy as well. And it leads us into really the question, which I'll get to in a minute for the whole group. I having that common vision, especially during times where we have so much other noise around us, both personally, but also professionally, is so critical. And if you do have that common vision, then as you were saying, each person is able to move a stone in that right direction. They're not moving a stone laterally. They're not moving a stone backwards in a different direction. You're not having the path widen and people getting further away from each other. If you have that common understanding, it really means that people can then work with more agency to achieve that vision. I think this is going to be a quite engaging conversation for the next 45 or so minutes. So this really leads us on to what we were just talking about a second ago, that all three of the panelists have led towards, about the need to have a common vision. And this quote came from the article that myself and Laura had put out, but really it's re-emphasizing in establishing that vision, but also building engagement and ownership in the team is really critical. So I'm going to open it up to anybody to really tackle either of these questions. So why is a common vision so key to ongoing change reform efforts? But also on the flip side, what are the risks we run if we don't establish a common vision? And I'll open that up to anybody who wants to jump in first.
I'll jump in, and I'm going to focus specifically on education, but I think in any office, that any workplace, common vision is critical to success. They say that good leaders establish a vision and get the right people on the bus. And you could have the right people, but if the bus isn't going in a particular direction, you may have chaos on that bus. So I think that establishing a common vision is key to moving in a direction. But if I take it down a notch, it's also critical to the people on the bus. It's fair, it's clear, it's calming. It's, if you don't know where your leader's taking you, it can be very, I think, disconcerting. And most importantly, it's clear to students. And I think we've got to work really hard right now to make sure students know that we've got this. We're going to take them where they need to go. We're not leaving them hanging. I'm so glad Greg brought up the social emotional piece, because I think we're seeing, like we've never seen before, kids who really need support academically, but also emotionally and socially. Yes. So bringing all of those things together, I think, is hugely important. The risk that we run by not establishing that and not establishing aligned expectation is, that teachers end up feeling, I want to focus on teachers for a second as a former teacher. Teachers end up feeling exhausted, unsupported, and just, I think, we're at a real risk right now of losing so many from the profession. And part of that is just sheer exhaustion, but also part of that is a sense of urgency and frenzy about what is our vision, what is our mission, and how do we bring kids back on their path.
Yeah, there's so much, we've mentioned it in a couple of times in these webinars as well. There's so much which aligns between the child and the teacher and the principal feeling safe and secure and healthy before you can actually then start to, push them academically. It's that old Maslow before Bloom. And I love that. I love your analogy about the bus, and maybe it's not putting people on the bus, but it's inviting people onto that bus. And so they understand where they're going and where we're heading as well.
I want to build on what Laura said. I think the common vision is empowering. And I've heard that from staff and teachers and community members and students, that if they feel that they've actually had a voice in the creation of that vision and that they have been heard. And I've written in my notes the difference between listening and hearing. You can say that you're a listener, but are you actually hearing what people are saying? So, if you hear the input from the stakeholders, they see that reflected in that common vision. They understand and are buying into or in agreement around that vision, then it's empowering to them. And I think it leads to confidence in their own decision making, because then they can see what my role is in this vision and these actions. How is that translating to my day-to-day job or my work? And that builds confidence, and confidence is one of the keys to resilience. And we keep talking about resilience over and over, but I think especially for teachers right now, their confidence is on shaky ground sometimes. They've had to do things really differently and in a very public way oftentimes on e-learning and changing their thinking. So I think that common vision leads to the confidence that teachers have and stakeholders have and kids have to continue their work.
Yeah. Greg, you must have had, a lot of conversations, I imagine, about engaging not only your school, but your community around the whole child work. So where does common vision sit for you, and how do you start to implement that?
Yes, sir. Yeah, great question. when I think of this, we have a few processes we use to, earlier I talked about kind of that whole community, whole school, whole child approach to doing this. We're linking arms with one another, cross-sector collaboration. Some call that collective impact. But the first step we do is we do a process called Porch conversations. And one of the things about vision, and all of us have probably done strategic planning. We've done a lot of that. Usually you get an advisory board together, you sit around, you work on a plan, but oftentimes what's left out are the voices of the real people in that community. And so we have a process called Porch conversations. We actually get out in pairs and we go and visit the barber shops. We go visit the laundromat. We go visit the soccer field. We go visit people on their porches in the neighborhood, segments, I guess, and people within our community that are never listened to and marginalized oftentimes from this kind of process. And we ask three simple questions. The first question was asked, what do you believe in? What are your, what are your values? What do you believe in? And oftentimes that question will lead to them thinking like, wow, I never really thought, well, you know what matters to me? Respect. That matters a lot to me. Or safety or health, or there's a lot of things. And we see what bubbles up when it comes to beliefs, and this is important because change happens from the inside out. And if we really want to bring about community transformation, that's start with the people. It can't be top down. It can't be elitist. It's got to be inside out. It's got to be the people's approach here. And this Porch conversation process allows it to be the people's initiative. Tacoma Whole Child, it's been going for a decade. How did that happen? Because it's the people's. It's the people's initiative. It's not top down. It's not from some, rich person, whatever group of people. It's the people. They love it. They embrace it. So that's the first question. What do you believe in? Second question is, what are your hopes and dreams for our youth? And then the last question is, what does youth success look like? And the answer to that question is critically important because it allows us to create benchmarks. If the community feels, the people of that community feel that leadership is really important, that early learning is really important, that partnerships is very important, that health and safety is very important. Let's create those as our benchmarks, and what gets measured gets done. And what we should be striving toward, the people did. And so I just think that's a really, really important process, that Porch conversation. And the other simple thing I was going to mention is we end up with planting 1,000 flowers and hoping something blooms every year in schools and in organizations, and taking stock of all the different initiatives, kind of like you're taking stock of your pantry, or take stock of all the initiatives you have going in your school system, in your school district. You might be surprised how many things you have going, and let's work smarter, not harder. Let's narrow down the most important things that we truly want to invest in, not just tomorrow, but long term. And in Tacoma, Washington, like you mentioned, Sean, we ended up with 260 or so different district level initiatives. And we were able to whittle those down to 10 key pillars, we call them. Here's our key pillars that we want to be known for and do really, really well over the next decade. And that kind of long-term thinking, what do we want to do really well, not just today, tomorrow, but 5-10 years from now, is critically important. Let's put some of those initiatives that aren't effective on the back burner. So those are two key things: Porch conversations, being initiatives I want to bring into this conversation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love the idea of those three questions as well. They do fit back to not only being logical thinking, but also they fit back to some of our BTS Spark work as well, because we do talk about, all right, you need to understand what your values are. You need to understand what the visioning is. And then you start to work out how, when you have that commonality, you start to change some ideas in people's behavior as well. So we talk at BTS Spark about the visioning and how the role of that leader becomes crucial in not pointing the direction towards the vision, but actually starting to establish these conversations and empower their stakeholders in what that vision would be. And I think it's something we skip too often. So if we talk about, we've talked about the the need for a common vision, but what are some of the steps? And you've outlined a couple of them here, Greg, but are there other steps that we have in not only setting that vision, but also bringing people on board? Because both Shah and Laura, you talked about the need to empower people in this process as well. So if you have any examples from the work from Centerpoint, the work from Bay Village schools, that would be great to hear.
I'll go first on this one, Laura. I've had a chance to do strategic planning at the state level with the Ohio Department of Education and at a district level within my own district. And in terms of bringing people on board, practically what I think worked were listening tours. So at the state level, they hosted regional talking evenings, and they had tables of stakeholders. Anyone could come. So it was a mixed group of community members and parents and nonprofits and education leaders and representatives from the Department of Education. And each table had a set of starting point questions, very similar to what Greg was talking about. And then some more focused questions around curriculum, around assessment, around the role of technology, on social emotional learning, on mental health supports. And everyone at the table had an opportunity to speak, to answer the questions. The facilitator's role was just to add some guiding questions to that and document. And then at the state level, all of those pieces of input were synthesized and then given to each of the strategic plan component committees. So I was on the curriculum and assessment component committee, and we got the analysis of all of that stakeholder input from across Ohio. And it was very useful in terms of writing language and visions and outcomes that were in line with what we were hearing the people were interested in, but also pushing on the edge a little bit, where we as educators and education professionals also felt were important, and finding that good blend so that people, when the strategic plan came out, could see they were reflected in that strategic plan. And we mirrored that at the district level. Same thing, we did a series of 10 stakeholder conversations. We hired a facilitator who was not part of the district. The facilitator gathered all of that information, and we actually made wordles out of their responses and used those wordles to identify key terms that were really important and at the heart of what our community wanted to see from our school district. So I think that's a step that was worth the time to do. And I see it now also guiding the actions that we're starting moving forward.
Yeah, I don't know if there's research out there, but I'm sure there is, or there must be, or there should be, I should say, somewhere, about if you take the time to actually engage people in any change effort, the amount of time that you spend is probably corresponds to the success rate of that change effort, because we see so many times that people jump over this empowerment portion about hearing from people, and then even if they're implementing something which is needed or required, it very often falls flat because people haven't bought into it. You know, you can't move that mountain by yourself, as you mentioned, Shah. Laura, do you have any examples from Centrepoint in how you've moved to form this common vision and steps that leaders should take?
Well, you know, I'm thinking about a recent experience we've had over the last 2 years to work with Chicago Public Schools to design its new K-5 literacy curriculum, now called Skyline. And just building off of both Greg and Shar's points, we didn't do that in a vacuum. We did that with regular and ongoing input from educators. And the Chicago educators and leaders were getting regular input from the community with the goal of creating a curriculum that really represented the community, the city, the needs of the students in the seats, not just some hypothetical student. And I think although that process probably took longer than writing a curriculum from scratch, you know, if you were sitting at your desk, in the end, to Shar's point, it will have much more impact and longevity because of the involvement of stakeholders. Going back to my quote, if you want to go far, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that effort really showed this aspect of going together.
Yeah, exactly. And Greg, you mentioned a couple of ways that you went out and you heard from, you know, the community members, and you gained that empowerment. but are there actions that you then needed to take internally at the district level to actually sort of upskill some of those leaders to become leaders of this, whole community-wide initiative?
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that comes to mind here is that, I mentioned kind of the why, the how, and the what. And let's say we were a district team and we've spent the year creating a shared vision. We've created a blueprint for implementation of that vision that's long-term. We've garnered input from our community, from our staff within our school district. What we would do next is we want to visit all of our schools within that school system. Just as an example, I'm here in Tuscaloosa, Alabama right now. We have a whole child partnership with Tuscaloosa County school system. We've developed this shared vision and we're ready now to put it into action. And so we're going to visit all 35 schools within Tuscaloosa County school system. And we're going to lay out the why, the how, and the what of Tuscaloosa County whole child, and allow the staff within all staff, classified, certificated, bus drivers, everybody, all staff to vote and to choose if they would like to be an initial adopter, we call cohort 1, or if they'd like to wait and implement next year or the year after. And then we will not work with that school and have them start implementation until 90% of the staff agree and buy in that, yeah, we want to do this. And sometimes we end up going back multiple times to a school, or for example, it might be just the English language arts department of the high school that is hung up on a question. So we visit with them during their PLC time. But what we end up doing is creating awareness and buy-in. And when that school is at 90% buy-in, that's our indication that they're ready for that first step. And our approach is a what about Bob approach. And you all seen that movie, What About Bob? Bill Murray, I love Bill Murray. But What About Bob, that movie? We take baby steps, little baby steps. We go slow, we go slow to go fast. We take baby steps and look for quick wins. And that creates more buy-in, and then more buy-in, and then more buy-in. And so we end up really creating a movement within not only the district, but within school. And other schools say, look, I want to jump on board. How can we sign up for this? And then district staff get lobbied and say, hey, we need this too. When can we go? It's like, well, we'll come and visit your school and explain it. So we call that awareness building, awareness visits. And I just think that's a critical part, because we have to understand our educators that it's always top down. Oh, this is what the district's asking us to do this. The state's asking us to do this. We have no choice. And that to me is sad. So we want to build that awareness up, build that buy-in up. And then you'll see that now we're able to sustain good things that work over time, as opposed to the average. I don't know if you all know the average lifespan of an initiative in school is 7 months. Do you all know that?
Wow.
That's the truth. And so that's not working. And so we got to do a new way. And the new way is kind of like this, like I'm describing, allows us to not have a 7 month, with another false start, another failed thing. Now we're on to the next thing. It's now we can sustain the good things we're trying to do, because we have that buy-in built. So I'm very passionate about this.
Yeah, no, we can hear the passion. We can hear the passion from all three of you, actually, and a number of great little African quotes and other quotes that we can, I'm sure people are tweeting out, or we can tweet out later on about it. So the question now becomes, you've got a vision, you've got buy-in. The question now becomes, what do you need to start to align? So we have some different initiatives here on the panel. One which is a whole school or a whole community approach, which is looking at the support and the health of the students in the community. And the other one, which is really looking at some of that bread and butter of what occurs in the school and what's going to really cement learning. So the question is really, what do we need to align? And is it going to differ between initiatives, or are there some commonalities?
I'm thinking about the last question, but I will start with the first question, which is, what do we need to align? And the easy answer is everything. You have to align everything. And if you don't, I love the example of car tire alignment. If you have a car and you're driving along and you're out of alignment, the small risk is you have put extra wear and tear on your car, and you have to, so wear and tear on the car. So that's wear and tear on the system of the school. Work harder to keep your car going straight. That's teachers working harder to have to get what they need. And none of us want that. Our teachers work hard enough already. And at the worst, significant danger to your car and your life. I don't want to get overly dramatic, but what we're seeing with the lack of alignment is a lack of really good results with kids. And so I think for an education system, it all has to start with that vision. What are the academic standards we want kids to know and be able to do? What are the kind of traits that we want them to develop so that they can be productive citizens? And then more and more, what are the things that we know we need them to develop so that they're resilient, so that they have grit, so that they're socially and emotionally strong? And then you build the system around that. What are the experiences they need in the classroom? What is the curriculum? What training do teachers need to develop that and deliver that curriculum? How to assess them? How to make sure that that whole system is equitable and builds into it fairness and strong culture. And what are the policies undergirding that can keep it moving forward? Like the road. I think of the policies as the road. You want the road to be straight. So I do think that that's like a kind of the sense, an overall 30,000 foot view of what does the aligned system consist of. I am an assessment wonk. Many of you know that. And when I think specifically at a very small grain level about what does alignment mean in assessment, we have this really wonky term called evidence-centered design, where you start with the end in mind. I know, Shar, yay, assessment. So if you start with
favorite slide, Laura.
That's right. You start by saying, what is it that you want kids to know and be able to do? And then you say, okay, we are going to give them the opportunities to do that. If you want them to know X, you don't give them the opportunity to do Y, because that's A, nonsensical, and B, not fair. So if you keep unfolding from there, what experiences do we need to do? What does that mean for assessment? What does that mean for our item writers, our question writers? How do we train them? And then all of those things connect as though you were connecting Russian dolls. So I like to think about that image. And I actually have one or two of my assessment experts on the phone who have been really focused on building equitable and culturally relevant assessments, because that brings in a whole other layer of thinking about what am I aligning to? I'm aligning to specific cultures, needs, kids, not hypothetical kids again, but specific kids who come to our schools with certain experiences.
Yeah, it shouldn't be rocket science, but it sometimes is, or it seems like it, that we need to actually understand and work out what do we want students to achieve, in this year, or via this course, or via this subject, and then work backwards from there. Sometimes we discombobulate it too much. It always amazed me that, understanding by design, has the same premise, and that should be common sense. Work out where you want the students to get to, and then work backwards. But great points.
Sean, I want to add to that evidence-centered design approach to assessment, that was one of those game-changing moments for me as an educator. I remember the first time I saw that slide and my brain went, oh, duh, why have you not been thinking this? Because I think the important takeaway from that, you've got two great diagrams for how to align things on this slide. But I think what gets lost sometimes is that alignment isn't diagrams, it isn't word lists, it's not symbols and images, and it isn't stuff. Like alignment isn't curriculum, although curriculum should be aligned. And alignment isn't assessment, although assessment should be aligned. Alignment is what the child should be able to do. So can you articulate, what do they sound like? What do they act like? What does their work look like as they're developing these knowledge and skill sets that you've decided as a group are important to them in terms of moving forward? And if you can't, as a group, talk about that, then it doesn't matter how great your diagrams are. It really starts with, can you as a team talk about what you want your kids to sound like, look like, act like when they're doing these things and when they're learning those things. Then find the curriculum that allows them to do that, and then find the tools that give you that information. But always start with what you want actually the kids to be doing and articulating that.
Yeah, I find it so great that even though we're talking about things or people who are skilled in assessment and curriculum and instruction, or we're also focusing on this whole school approach, everything that we're talking about is mirrored in both conversations. Greg, I'd imagine you were nodding your head during when both Shah and Laura were talking, but getting that common vision and understanding how these pieces might play into it must have been critical in both Tacoma, but also now in Tuscaloosa.
Absolutely. One of the things I was thinking here too, and this is great to have a data conversation about how we're using data to drive, beginning with the end in mind, which, Shar and Laura, I think is absolutely perfect and totally agree. I was thinking too, I don't know if y'all know, there are really, really good tools out there to measure our implementation leadership, going back to Simon Sinek, the why, the how, and the what. But sometimes we as leaders aren't aware that we can actually measure district capacity, our district's capacity to lead sustainable change over time. There are tools, for example, the District Capacity Assessment, which comes out of the National Implementation Research Network, is not widely used by district leaders in our school systems. At least I see a very kind of hit and miss use of it. And if it is used, it's more in a summative way as opposed to as a continuous improvement tool. There's also implementation leadership scales that are free and publicly available. You can go to implementationleadership.com and to measure your implementation climate, your leadership, really, really key. And then also getting down to the school level, we have tools like the whole school implementation guide that we use for our whole child approach. It gives a step-by-step walkthrough, and it's an action planning tool to help implement successfully. We also have a whole district implementation guide. There's also for you LEAs or not LEAs, they're doing regional work or supporting regions of school systems. There's a tool called the Regional Capacity Assessment, which a lot of folks are not too familiar with. If you're working outside of schools, the Youth Program Quality Assessment or YPQ or YPQA, these tools allow us to look at how well are we doing as an organization with our ability to implement and sustain things that work over time. We'll see gaps within when we do these kind of tools. We have areas for improvement that we didn't know about. We can shine a light on areas that we weren't familiar with. The other thing is too that's really key here, Sean. I'll end with this: is that we don't do the how well at all. We don't create implementation structures. That vision you see on the left-hand side, that whole community, whole school, whole child model is beautiful, beautiful. But then how do we make it happen? What we need is we can use the science of implementation. We can have a district implementation team, shared leadership, create that vision, that implementation plan, and then school leadership teams, and not have 16 different school leadership teams, which is right now what we're dealing with, because there's people have purchased different programs, and these different programs, they create a leadership team for your school. And now I have 16 different leadership teams for my school. One leadership team that guides implementation of all the different initiatives at that school level. And then we work our way down, grade level teams, or if I'm middle high school, department teams, and that clear communication between district teams, school leadership teams, and then also PLCs or collaboration teams, department teams is missing. We can also mirror that outside of school. We can have a community leadership team, and then for each organization that's part of whole community, organization leadership teams and specific programs within that organization. I guess what I'm trying to get at here, implementation structure. Yeah. And these structures allow us to implement over time and create that shared leadership that we've worked hard to create can be sustained over time. And the other thing is about processes, and it's the processes that yield those results. And having team meeting protocols, that the same meeting protocol we use at the district level, you can use at the school level and also at the PLC level. So a shared meeting protocol. This is how we meet together. And when we meet together, this is how we operate within our systems. So they don't have to create meeting protocols and agendas and things. It's all created, standardized across the system. So those are just, some three key things there that I think are important.
Wonderful. And feel free to share any of those links if you have them into the chat box as well. And we're of course running out of time as we always do, but I'm gonna now just turn it over to Shah and Laura, because you started us off in this conversation about continuous improvement and continuous alignment and having that infrastructure there. But I'm wondering if Shah and Laura, you have any recommendations or tips around how we have successful continuous school improvement and alignment.
Well, I'll just quickly jump in and follow up on what Greg was saying, that you can't just have a structure, you actually have to have an implementation plan, process, and the feedback loop about how are we doing. And that's where the data comes in. I can't imagine an improvement process that doesn't have regular data that is infused into that process, partly for just checks on progress, partly for transparency and accountability, and then partly to get people connected around a shared purpose and experience. So for successful implementation, data is key. Data are key, excuse me. I'm going to correct, as a former English teacher, I'm going to correct my own grammar. Data are key.
That's right. We can go back afterwards and edit that out for you. Okay.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Any quick comments you want to add to that, Shah?
Yeah, one of the formats that I have found really helpful in leading work and looking for evidence of the impact of your work versus evidence that you actually did the work. Those are two separate things. I've used logic models as a structure for coordinating activities within our vision or our action, because it points back to your vision and your goals, but it allows you to identify what are the resources, time, people, money that you have. What are the barriers that you might be facing? Can you overcome them? Are you going to be okay with them? Are you going to work around them? And then what's the evidence that you want to see that these incremental steps are taking place? What will that look like? And then what do you hope to see as the impact of your work? Because I think sometimes we get so caught up in the data that demonstrates that we did the work that we lose sight of why we were doing the work or what we want to see as the outcome of that work. And sometimes that evidence is quantitative data, and sometimes that evidence is qualitative data. So making that decision on how you're going to collect that evidence and then as a team reflect on it, then make your decisions. So the logic model organization I have found has been really helpful in doing that.
Excellent, excellent. No, some really good points and really good tips as well. We're quickly running out of time. We do have a question in on the Q&A, so I'm going to turn to that quickly, and then I'm going to ask our panelists to give us a quick 1-minute recommendation on some actions. So the question, you won't be surprised to hear, refers back to sort of COVID, and how do we start or how do we continue some of these change efforts when teachers are so burnt out and when there's so many things happening in our schools right now? So it's a fairly common issue, but if anybody has any tips or examples, we'd love to hear them.
I can talk to that directly because that is my day-to-day world right now. Where we've been successful is viewing our teachers and our entire staff as partners in the work and hearing from them what are their immediate needs, what's working for them, and where are they feeling frustrated. We've used a professional learning model that's very tiered. Rather than the big one-size-fits-all, we have big picture professional learning, we have do on your own professional learning, and we have a sit down next to you and do it with you step-by-step professional learning, acknowledging that our teachers are in different places. We also have been very flexible in how we're using our financial resources, especially our ESSER funds from COVID, to support initiatives that we know need to be moving forward to support teachers in the work they're doing in their classrooms, and to support our students, making sure they have access to what they need. But it's really about listening and involving them and not making assumptions.
Yeah, wonderful. What I'm going to do now is if any other questions come in, we can send them off to the panelists, but we're going to move straight on to now to get a 1-minute summation or some action steps that people would like to suggest as we start to wrap this conversation up. So I think we're going to go through the same order. So Laura, you're going to have a minute to go through and offer some action steps that you suggest people do from here.
Well, I've been I've been learning so much from my colleagues. I have some personal action steps that I turn to in any time of when I'm looking to change or to learn. And that is to surround myself with really smart people and to look internally and be open, be open to change. So that's one just general bucket of, the people on the bus really matter. And at the same time, don't insulate yourself to just the people on the bus, but also look outside to community, to stakeholders, to partners, to get the best ideas, even if, and especially if they are different from yours. So my one thing I try to hold in my head is, strength in numbers, and going back to the beginning, you go far together.
Great point. Yeah, I think we sometimes assume that certain people, because they're in a certain role, only have expertise in that one element. And it's amazing when you do open up the listening circles or the porch, what do we call them? Porch conversations, how many great ideas and skills are out there. Greg, your 1 minute.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I agree. This has been an awesome conversation. I think that the first thing I'd like to just punctuate is that just now's the time. I mean, has there ever been a more salient time to move ahead with a whole community, whole school, whole child approaches? And I think a big lesson we've all learned from all of this is that we gotta be preventive. We got to work smarter, not harder. We got to break down silos that we're so used to operating under and being fragmented, disorganized, not just how we operate within schools, but out of schools as well. And so let's break down those silos and come together. And Laura said it really, really well. And I'd also say too that, it's very easy for us within a school system to, there's things like MTSS, which is great, which is focused on academics, behavior. And those are the two strands. Or RTI, which is primarily academic. Of course, there's behavioral RTI, but these tend to be academics, behavior, and that's the end of the story. But we need to think broader. We need to think in a comprehensive way. And I love the model you laid out there, Sean, and you were the architect of that whole community, whole school, whole child framework, which allows us to think broadly about what's the health of our employees, our employee wellness, family engagement, community involvement, nutrition, health. And of course, we've learned all of these things in the pandemic, that Maslow's before Bloom. We have to think of the safety and the health of all of us before we can jump into higher order thinking and all the great things we want to do academically. And that's some of the reasons why youth don't respond to some of the approaches we're trying, and all that good investment we made into great curriculum and great PD. And then we have still that student under the desk sleeping or not showing up to school at all. So Maslow before Blooms. But I just think the words I would say is let's think comprehensive. Let things sustainable, change over time, and let's build the structures in place to make that happen. So
wonderful. Thank you, Greg. And last but not least, over to Shah.
I would say that grace is probably a word I've been using quite a bit over the past few weeks. Giving yourself and your team and your community some grace, because there's a lot of change happening simultaneously and it's overwhelming. So helping them to redirect, to prioritize, to keep the work on what's really important for the kids. And that this is really iterative thinking. I've been thinking a lot about iterations, that it's not a failure. It's not we shouldn't have done it. It's what did we learn from this one? What can we carry forward to the next iteration as we're making this change? And I think shifting that mindset to viewing things as iterations allows people to think outside the box, to bring different ideas, because they know that it's not set in stone and that it is changeable again, but we're still going to hold on to those anchor things that are really important to us so that we're not completely adrift.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of grace. I think we all need more grace at the moment. But also the idea that iterations, and it sort of flows back to what you were talking about moving the stones, is you can do things in small steps, and you can also start to assess and review what the success is. as you're doing those small steps and making adjustments as need be. Just as a little word to our audience, we at BTS Spark do educational leadership, and we have a program focusing around leading change that's really come to the fore during the last year or so. People are dealing with uncertainty, they are dealing with all that noise. And so what are those skills that not only the leaders need, but also some of the teams need across the school, across the district, to help them lead change? Because we shouldn't assume that every leader has those skills or has those mindsets as well. All of these recordings from our webinars go up on our YouTube site, and that should be later this week. You'll all be getting an email saying it's now up, and you're welcome to share them. We also have recordings of our previous ones on well-being, on messy leadership, on personal resilience, and we've had some great speakers from Michael Fullen to Andy Hargraves, Michelle Borber, Deb Delisle, Joe Sanfilippo, a whole range of people so far. But I've really enjoyed as well the conversation today with our panelists, and I hope you've enjoyed it as well. We could have gone, as we always do, on for another hour, but we are going to have to cut it short. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to Laura, to Shah, and to Greg, and thank you all, whether it's morning or whether it's now afternoon, for tuning in to this Sparking Conversations webinar. Thank you.